where's a place that's a virtuous center? Ultimately church. That's why there's this resurgence, I think, to a lot of people coming into the Orthodox Church, because people are seeking community, not only that, but virtuous community. Where is virtue housed? What are the commandments? Christ. The commandments are the virtues, and people are driven to want to be virtuous, unbeknownst sometimes to themselves.
All right, welcome everybody to The Body Aesthetic. My name is Matthew, and before anyone asks, no, this is not a bathrobe. I'm wearing a Moroccan robe for a particular reason. I'm kind of an idiot, and I don't know what poison ivy looks like, so here we are. Anyways, today I have Adam joining me for our next episode of our podcast series, where we interview real folks sharing their real stories, encountering Christ in the Holy Church of Orthodoxy. So Adam here is a licensed marriage and family specialist therapist in the city of Nashville, Tennessee. And Adam is going to introduce himself and tell us about his background and then his journey to Orthodoxy. Go ahead, Adam.
Nice to meet everybody. So I guess let me see where I want to even start. I could go far as back as like my dad was atheist growing up. My mom was Presbyterian, and growing up, I kind of had there's this gobbledygook of non-denominationalism that go across and you're like, what is this? You don't really, I didn't really take it too seriously. Met a couple friends, and it was mainly the friendships that, kind of attracted me, whatever the gobbledygook was, and then I was in that for a little bit, the non-denominational-ish realm, until I got to college. And then those relationships kind of fell away. And then I was like, I'm not really even kind of picking apart the kind of axioms that were a part of what I was even believing. It was more like feeling rather than, cohesive truth, when I look back and actually can comment on it. But then for a couple of years, I was in a metal band. I did all the,
Oh, that's cool.
yeah, and I was the vocalist there, and that's neither here nor there, but, eventually came in, I was like, there's meaning here, it can't, the nihilistic kind of waters we're swimming in our culture. I was like, there's meaning. It's not just me making my own meaning. Subjectivity doesn't I can't subjectively create my own reality. Your truth, my truth doesn't make sense. But at the time, it was more just, I'm depressed and I don't know what life's all about, and you can't live the nihilistic, worldview coherently,
Mm-hmm.
that, right? But there's this level of, then I was searching. I was like, okay, if life has meaning, where is meaning housed? And I was like, okay, well, where have ancient societies usually house that? It's like God, right? And I was like, okay, well, which God? And the only God that came down from the mountain, let's just say, was Christ God. And then I was like, okay, which Christ God? So then I had to go down the whole path. I found this statistical software that traced religions like all the way back to 4000 BCE, and essentially really went down this historical pathway. And then I was like apostolic succession. So I kind of got to Anglicanism, Catholicism, Orthodoxy,
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, then I was like, well, it's kind of hard to tell from the historical side of things. Now I need to delve into the apostolic succession, what the theology is. And what made most sense, it essentially was what's been maintained, So then essentially, St. Gregory of Palamas was the one who really helped me out with the essence energies distinction, go look that up on your own. But there's this level of, you get to that point, you're like, this is never changed. There's not a development or an addition like the Catholic Church, or a taking away or a protesting, like the Protestant side of things. And the Orthodox are just like, well, why don't you guys come back to us? And everybody else is like, well, I don't want to do that. So long and the short of it, though, I came into the church, very patient priest. very welcoming community there at Holy Trinity back in, before COVID times.
Mm.
And then now I go to St. Elizabeth out in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And my parents are now both Orthodox, thank God. So that was a big
Glory to
thing. At
God.
the beginning, my dad was atheist, my mom was Presbyterian. They thankfully came around. So now I got to get my brother. But that's God's time. So that's a little bit about the Orthodoxy journey, kind of medium to expedited uh, story. So, but yeah, I'm a marriage and family therapist too. I do enjoy that. That's kind of more subsidiary, obviously subsidiary to the Orthodoxy. You got to baptize a lot of stuff, and the therapy world's a whole wild west of a whole gambit. But trying to bring people to psychological stability, and so that they can have an ability to be less addicted to the passions or things that are pulling them down to the earth, so to speak. So, um, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Can I ask, so growing up with one parent, atheist, one parent, you said Presbyterian,
Yes, yeah.
did you get exposure to Christianity through your mom, or was it kind of just, I don't know, maybe it's always there, but didn't really know much about it?
Yeah, I mean, I did. My mom would bring us to church or the faith community. And essentially, yes, she introduced what she knew. You
Mm.
know what I mean? So there's this level of, they both worked a lot though. So there was this level of, okay, they're working a lot. They bring me to church on Sunday. And, you know, there was talk there, nothing like a memorable talk that comes to my mind, but it was kind of like salt, you know,
Mm.
interspersed every once in a while. It's the way of life, how they acted, how they interacted with me, that was the most influential. So I'd say it was probably more that rather than any discursive, thought process or discourse, you know.
I ask because I'm curious. Like a lot of people will grow up in a similar environment, and before they come back to Christianity and then ultimately Orthodoxy, they'll kind of go on this meandering journey, and they'll experiment with Eastern religions or other kinds of stuff. Did you have anything like that, or you were just like, I kind of have this feeling that Christianity is it. I just don't know which is the real Christianity.
Yeah, so my dad actually talked more from that self-improvement meditation side of things, not like there was this book called 10% Happier by this guy. I forget his name, but he was like, "Hey, you should read this." I was like, "Oh, like the health benefits," because my dad's super into health. Like real like he still works out and he's like 60 something. He's like going to the gym and so that was instilled in me, but that's another, side tangent. But he it was never new agey in the sense of like this is my central organizing principle of how I'm living. But there was this kind of, okay, how can I take from this to benefit my mind or my mental health? Or not the new agey stuff is, pervasive in our culture. Like, it's becoming, Saint Seraphim Rose, the religion of the future, that's coming through. So I didn't know that back then. But that was kind of the slight push, but I never went too far. It's kind of like a slide, the water's going, but I'm like, I'm not going down that slide, but I like that I'm on the slide sort of thing. So, um, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
would
so
never.
you're looking for something essentially useful, right? Like you're taking what you can apply to your own life in terms of a, like you said, a self-help, self-improvement way.
Yeah, yeah, which was a whole another worldview. But yes, that was what I was doing back then.
That is a whole nother worldview. We could do a whole episode just on that because I
Exactly.
myself like was super into, it's funny. It's called self-help, and just in the phrasing, you can see the lack of God in it because it's not about relying on God or relying on, your creator or heaven or any kind of higher power at all. It's just like I am my own God. I help myself. I have the power. I have this and that. Right. So yeah, I've gone down that rabbit hole myself.
'Cause the really interesting thing is that's what causes a lot of in my practice, you see this level of self-sufficiency, which is at the core of a lot of the passions, and you see this, and I'm trying to help people out of that, but it's like, well, if they don't have any ascribing to any, like, I try to use conscience, like,
Mm,
oh, can you listen to your conscience or, versus listening to yourself, the ego. And it's really hard
mm.
to pull people out of that self-sufficiency because it's subconsciously what we're swimming in, you know?
That's a
So,
great way to put it too, because we identify with our thoughts. Like pretty much every thought we have, we identify with. Like this is coming from me, especially when we don't have the discernment to understand that there's, powers at work trying to influence us, specifically demonic powers. And so you can have demonic thoughts being whispered in your ear, and then if you don't have that discernment, you think, "Oh, this is me thinking this," right?
hmm
But then to call it a conscious or subconscious is at least starting to break that identity tying to that thought, right? So like there's, it's like step one. Yeah. I like that.
yeah, trying to at least, you know?
Right.
That's actually what I read it somewhere from either a saint or a father or just somebody who's a priest is, you know, the more that people identify with their thoughts, it's like that self-trust is what leads to psychosis because it's they're trusting all the thoughts like you're saying, and it's becoming like, I am that. There is not a belief in the demonic. There's not a belief in, these thoughts aren't me. So they're tricked into believing the demons don't exist and that is me, these voices I hear, right? But not all of it's demonic, but there's an intertwining, a synergistic relationship. And it's just like, you have a compassion for a lot of them that are they don't know, right? You're like, like how can you have some semblance of healing from that? It's difficult. So
Definitely.
yeah,
And I do want to talk more about that, but I want to switch back gears, back to your life. Um, you said that you were searching for meaning, and how could you describe that? Was that just like you just felt unsatisfied with everything that life had to offer, and you were just looking for something to fill that satisfaction?
yes, I would say, you can sometimes just see some things in the rearview mirror, in retrospect. I don't think I'd have the words to say it at the time, but it was more. I think it was a percentage was the lack of satisfaction of what the world had to offer. And that was a great percentage. There was also identity, like who am I? In that as well. Like the world doesn't the world's not gonna give you they're gonna give you a who am I, but it's more from this what's the pervasive worldview of the society we're swimming in? Like, okay, well, what is it, right? Create your own meaning, be a cog, be somebody who produces a lot success, the self-improvement. We can go back into that conversation later, but it's like I didn't feel like that was meaningful. You get to the looking back, the mindfulness of death, which I don't think I was thinking about at the time, but it was this level of what am I doing? What am I it's my production is into what is sustaining me. It's not substantive. It's not filling. I'm realizing I'm using a lot of relief and insulation to try to fill my deep heart. But this is not what I'm doing right now. The music, great. Music's great, but okay, all the things, all the substances were around, all the temptations, right? If you throw yourself into that, you just numb yourself out, and that numbing becomes heavy. And I felt that heaviness,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this heaviness is not right. This is not how I don't feel light. I don't feel free. But I think that was the noose, the conscience telling me that, but I didn't know it was. It was God speaking, but it wasn't, I didn't know. And I think a lot of people experience that as they're coming into the church too, is something similar to me in various personal, unique ways, not exactly as me, but that central organizing or that principle, I think is common to a lot of people and they use different language though, I'm sure.
Mm. Yeah. And okay, so that was the driving factor for searching for the truth of Christ, because like you said, Christ is the only God that's condescended down to us, right? When you had that thought, like, well, who is Christ? Who is God? Who's the real Christ? When you're presented with uh, an almost infinite, you know, amounts of offers for Christ for all these different denominations. Uh, like, how did you know? I guess was it maybe a personality thing or something instinctual inside you that was like, there's one of them that's right. How come like you didn't just choose, let's say, Mom's Presbyterian Church and then leave it at that?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, God. He helped me a lot. And a lot of the people, I don't know, maybe is the first thing after that. I think there was a lot of gifts along the way that I could have gone one of those other paths, if that makes sense. Given I think it was I think I was living based on feeling for a very, very long time. And I was like, I need to understand logic, truth. There's a roadblock with that, but I think that was helpful for the time being. I was like, there can't, these two people saying two different things. They're antithetical to each other. They're not, you can't hold to the law of non-contradiction. I think ultimately was a big thing, kind of cutting me out of that your truth, my truth mentality. That
Mm,
feels good because we don't get conflict, but conflict needs to happen sometimes, healthy conflict. But it was this drive towards, okay, there is truth. Where is truth? Because that was after the meaning, purpose, truth. That was kind of the road of
mm,
sorts. Um, so that road helped me channel my emotion a little bit more rather than it being the leader. But then the roadblock was it's not just mental. It's not just logic. You have to live this. You can't just think this. So that was later down the line, but that was the meaning, purpose, truth guiding the feeling rather than feeling leading that.
mm. I'm curious. I grew up Orthodox, but I tell everyone I had, I guess, a prodigal son period in my life, where I didn't go fully atheist, but I just wasn't really religious. I wasn't going to church. I wasn't attending liturgies, and coming back, I let's just say I was very worldly, and I came to a point where I was like, I I know somewhere in my heart that Orthodoxy is it. Orthodoxy is the truth. It's mostly in my head right now. Like I rationally now have accepted that Orthodoxy is it. but then my struggle was like, I still didn't really fully believe it in my heart. Like there was a ember there, but I didn't, I had it up here. I didn't have it down here. And my struggle was to participate in the Orthodox life and the liturgical life to try to bring myself down, my faith down here. And I'm still working on that, obviously, but like the centurion in the Bible, Lord, help my unbelief. That was like my prayer. Did you have a similar experience, or have currently have a similar experience like that? With because like we talked about before we went live, is a lot of people come to the church, particularly men, where it's like, we're convinced from our rational intellectual perspective, but that's not orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is not just up here. God wants all of you, particularly the seat of your heart.
Mm. Yeah, I'd say it's hard to put off the things that we find pleasure in when they're hurting us down the line, and the devil tries to trick us into thinking, well, that's going to be satisfying. That's going to satisfy you forever, And then you pick it, and he's like, well, you're never going to be forgiven. All right, despair, despair. Like that whole pain pleasure cycle that St. Maximus the Confessor talks about. And it was hard for me, and it's still hard for me, because I wish my catechism had, with all the blessings that came with it, a more experiential, transfiguratory um, purification of the heart process, which did happen in God's timing, but the focus being there versus all the history, which the history is good. You need to know. I mean, it's all good stuff. I wish that those who are coming to the church get catechized from that purification process versus just the heady intellectual stuff. I needed more of that. Thank God I've had a lot of great priests that have helped me, with that, even when I came in, so I'll say that I think a lot of the intellectualized stuff, you're thinking about God versus the experience of God, was a defense mechanism for me. It was like, I know all the truth. I know the right thing. I know the right thing, and thus then I feel good. Right. And then along with all the other passions, the more fleshly passions, or like, the more, the soul's different layers, those different putting off of those things, right? Whether that's, alcohol, drugs, those fleshly, you know, ones versus, the desiring faculty, it's like, oh, I desire to have a bunch of money, you name it, right? Or like the pride, the intellectual faculty, like all those things are still trying to be transfigured out, through the grace of God. But I don't think I learned that as much coming in. And that was a struggle until I got 3 years in and I encountered the cross. I was like, oh, you know, I can't think my way out of these things. I need, I think there's a lot of good things about the 12 steps, which actually, you can take, there's this great book called The 12 Steps to Transformation by Father Matthias Weber, and he baptizes the 12 steps. And I wish that people had to read that, in catechism.
And that's the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous?
Yes.
Okay.
A lot of good principles there for, any passion, any addiction, whether it's socially acceptable or not. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously it's with Orthodoxy as, for lack of a better word, I hate to use the word lifestyle, but because it's even more than a lifestyle. It's like, it's our very being, it's reality itself. But um, I think maybe the lifestyle is underappreciated for those coming into the church. And just like, what exactly, I mean, I don't want to say blanket statement, so I won't say that, but Yeah, just a matter of participating beyond just reading, right? Beyond just intellectual exercise. That's embodying the the worship. So prostrating, you know, bowing, yeah, weeping before your icons, all that stuff that softens our heart to allow Christ to come in, because the world, and that was my struggle. My heart was just so hard because I was so enmeshed in the world, and that's what the world does to you. Is it makes you build up the walls, because it's violent. It's violent to you physically and spiritually. Um, and that will kind of seg me into a conversation I wanted to talk to you about, because you are a therapist, and in the modern day we have this loneliness epidemic, right? Trademark term, but um, the fact is that like people are more lonely than they've ever been, at least in recent history that we can statistically track. But um, we it's obvious to anyone who's paying attention that we get more and more atomized as life gets more and more complex, advanced, technologically advanced, and we get more uh, technologically connected, but more personally disconnected. And so that's led to a lot of rates of depression, loneliness. And I think it's really interesting what you said about how a lot of your clients are that participate in that self-help environment and that self-help space, because, and this ties into the self versus the community. I'm going to make the point that as time goes on, and with the advancement of technology, um, and just like I said, as life gets more and more complex, there's more we have to deal with. There's more we have to just do on a day-to-day basis. And technology makes us more efficient and enables us to use tools to accomplish things quicker and faster. But then that just opens us for more to do, right? It's not like we have less to do. Like we just, there's just every day I'm like, the day just flies by and it's already like evening time. And I'm just like, there's never a time where you're just like stopping and just like living, just existing, right? You're always doing something. And I think a lot of it has to do with a lack of community, and a lack of relationships, because we have to do everything, right? Especially if you're like a single person, you have to work full time to make a living. And sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you have to have a side hustle in order to survive. You got to do your own laundry. You got to cook your own food. You got to do the dishes afterwards. You got to take care of your house or your lawn. You got to do everything. Like whatever, you got to call the credit card company. You got to call the insurance company. All of it has to come from you, right? Especially when you're alone and you're atomized in that way. And so, for self-help people like me, it was like at a certain point, I was like, yeah, pile more stuff on me, because the more I do, the more power I give myself, right? I'm empowering myself by doing it all by myself. But there's a limit to what we can do. And I think that's no surprise that a lot of your clientele are people that are suffering from the byproducts and the consequences of a lifestyle like that. So high anxiety, depression, things like that. So let's talk about a little bit about that. Let's talk about maybe what you think are the causes that I haven't mentioned here, and then what are potential solutions for establishing a greater sense of community in the modern world. Because we talk about it a lot. We always say we need to go back to village mentality and build communities. And it's like, well, what does that look like practically? Because practically, my friends live 30, 40 minutes away, and my family's, 20, 30 minutes away. Like, we don't live in a village. So practically speaking, how do we kind of increase those or make those connections and those relationships so that we can kind of ease the burdens of the modern life?
Hmm. So the causes, how much can we actually fix this? I would say we gotta live in reality right now, but I would say the causes they've been going on for a long time. once, let's just say the separation of church and state, and, God's not at the center of our culture as much anymore. We have this deistic kind of culture, that we've kind of gotten into. And there's been this landslide of, well, it's not even, hmm, deistic, we've gotten much worse, right? The social experiment of, America. But there's this level of, okay, if God's not in the center of our culture, where's virtue? So virtue, it's not just I want to join any. I don't want to just be, going from loneliness to any community, right? If we're lonely, a lot of people solve that by going to bars, right? They can go to bars. They can go to where's a place that's a virtuous center? Ultimately church. That's why there's this resurgence, I think, to a lot of people coming into the Orthodox Church, because people are seeking community, not only that, but virtuous community. Where is virtue housed? What are the commandments? Christ. The commandments are the virtues, and people are driven to want to be virtuous, unbeknownst sometimes to themselves. So it's like, there's that fullness that comes there. So I think that it's a twofold thing. It's not just loneliness. It's also this absence of purpose, meaning, virtue. So let's just say the practical, okay, we're not going to, get back to this place where society has the, virtue at the core necessarily. We have to acquire the spirit of peace, as Saint Seraphim of Sarov says. We have to acquire the spirit of peace, and 1,000 around us will be saved. So first off, how can I focus on becoming virtuous in the church, right? Then from that place, what I say for a lot of clients is, okay, where are you going for community? What's life-giving? What's not life-giving? Like, if you're going to the bars, that's probably not going to be life-giving for you to build community there. These countries, I have a friend that's in Spain. He got married there. These more communal cultures have these things called third spaces. So what I think would be really cool is if, I realized for myself that I had to start a community. I couldn't wait around. So I started this, trying to go, I went to a lot of the parishes around, Middle Tennessee area, and started to just get to know everybody, and then I added them to a group me for the Facebook group, joined another Facebook group, and we just tried to cultivate everybody together. So that's the practical way I've tried to create community for myself, but also with others. There's run clubs. Run clubs are better than the bars, if I'm trying to, help a secular person get connected, right? So where are these places? They're forming. It's like, but do you know where to find them? Run clubs, church. I could make the argument, hey, come to the Orthodox Church. I have, an icon in my therapy room that my parish priest recommended I put in there. And I do as much as I can without forcing and full throttling people. But it's like, hey, where's the virtue community? Where's at least some virtue in a community that you can start to, you may not want to go to the dating apps. Don't go to the dating apps. Try to go build some social skills and go talk with people. Go say, hey, how are you today? Get outside of yourself. I think that comment you made about, that self-sufficiency, that self-improvement, that self-help, gets us siloed inside of ourselves, is what I say to a lot of clients. It's like, how can you get outside of yourself? How can you go help, volunteer? Sure, there's, the best volunteering is in the church, but I think that there's some good, true, and beautiful things about volunteering. Help the portico, help these women that are single mothers, with their children, help in various forms. There's so many opportunities to go out and meet people who are seeking some semblance of good, true, and beautiful, that you don't want to go to some places, you want to go to some other places. And the solutions, I think, are more, we've got to get outside of our houses. We're not going to be waiting for Amazon to send us our friends on our front porch.
Not yet.
Not yet, exactly. For better or for worse, right? But we got to get off the apps. We've got to get out in person. Not to say that apps and technology are bad. It's just, it needs to be a tool, not a reliance. And we need to be discerning much more with we're in a low trust society. That's something I also wanted to say. We're in a very low trust society, and we do not understand the qualities of trust. Like there's this shame researcher named Brene Brown. It's a corny acronym. It's easy to like remember. It's just braving, just so people can remember it. I don't like the corny stuff, but it's really helpful in knowing what goes into trust, having good boundaries, being reliable, um, having accountability, not gossiping. She calls it vault, but it's essentially gossip. Like don't gossip, don't receive gossip, that breaks trust. Having integrity, not being judgmental. Sure, there's discernment, but more condemnation, discernment, condemnation. That's a whole nother tangent. We could talk about what the difference between that is, but just to keep it simple, being discerning, loving, compassionate, being generous with others. Those are trustworthy qualities. If those are broken, you don't have a secure relationship. We have a lot of insecure relationships because we don't understand a societal, organized virtue not being at the center of our culture. We don't understand what are the standards, these standards that were just in these more communal, virtuous cultures that people just accepted. They didn't have to talk about it. These were accepted, healthy things. Now we're in like your truth, my truth land where it's like, okay, what is even the American culture? Like, what is it? What's the standard we need to abide by? And what's lost is virtue and understanding of trust and security in relationships. Like, who is to say what a healthy expectation in a relationship is? Who is to say where
Any
are
standard?
what are we getting? What standard? What boundary? So that makes it, I think, also hard because if we're not forming relationships based around principles that are absolutely true, not to say there isn't subjective, personal preference, will, desire, right? I'm not going to say that it's either or, it's both and synergistically. But I need to conform to healthy relationship standards rather than I just feel this is right, right? So,
well, I think it's really interesting that that acronym that you're listing out from the researcher about what builds trust. Those are all Orthodox things. I mean, and Christian things, and the extent with which so like the atheist and new atheist movement, it's like there's been a rejection of the Christian inheritance that we've inherited for the last 2,000 years, starting in the East and spreading to the West, and pretty much what we were saying for decades to probably hundreds of years is like society is based on these Christian values, and those values aren't they're not universal in the sense that like non-Christians hold the same values, right? And so there's some overlap. Obviously there's truth that exists in some forms outside of Christianity, right? So we say Orthodoxy is the fullness of the truth, so there's some nuggets that exist elsewhere, but the fact that Western civilization was built on Christian values, and now as we abandon those Christian values, our society is becoming more and more low trust because of all those acronyms that you're listed. I don't remember everyone you said, but those are all the Christian values that society was built on. Now we don't have them anymore, so no more trust. And then that's how you see society fracturing. So it's like exactly what we were. We as Christians were warning against, as the atheist movement was on the rise, and still pretty much is. I mean, we have a lot of people that are coming back to the faith, but still the dominant, worldview is the nihilistic, atheist, materialist mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's
And
really true.
and everyone's on SSRIs and beta blockers, but they're like, no, but this is great. This is real. This is real society, how it should be. And it's like, you hate yourself. You don't even know who you are, and you hate yourself, and you hate everyone else. Like, that's not a good society.
It's the socially acceptable numbing out, because it lines the pockets of those who are benefiting from those. I always, for medication, just to comment shortly on that, is I'm like a 6 month, if you need it for 6 months, like, okay, to stabilize yourself, to get off of it. Like, you don't want to be relying upon that for your well-being because, you don't even know what they're putting into I mean, it's a lot of testing. I'll keep it at that. But yes, how to have a healthy self-love, is in virtue. How do I love Christ is how I love myself. You know, not in the sense of selfishness, but like if I don't want to take care of my soul, then do I really love myself? Like, and who, if they hate
Hmm.
themselves, it's like there's a lot of, I would say, sad demonic influence in that because it goes back to what you were saying earlier is like believing all the thoughts, It's like if all these thoughts, you know, that self-hatred makes sense without an understanding of being made in the image of God. Like, where do you go? I mean, what are you doing to love yourself? I guess it feels good. Like I was having a conversation with someone and he was like, well, I think the conversation went like it was starting off. I'm feeling good. I was like, you're feeling good. Tell me what good. Can you help me understand what you mean by that I think it was more things are going good or something like that. I was like,
Yeah.
good. Like, how do you know? Like, how would you know that? How do you know you're feeling good? How do you know if that means that your life's on the right track? You know, those are two different kind of lines. And I don't think a lot of people they feel the effects and they have no idea where that torment is coming from that they have that you just were talking about, right? Oh, I guess I'm going to go to SSRIs. That's what Dr. Billy told me, right? Like, who do I trust? How do I know who I can trust? Who is, how do I discern? I have no discernment without knowing who I can trust. It's
Right.
who am I going to trust, not I'm just going to trust myself. It's like you have an arbiter. You have somebody you're going to, whether you know it or not. Um,
Well, I had this thought when you said the image of God, and this is just a thought I'm having now, so maybe it needs fleshing out, but about the hatred, people hating themselves and that prevalence. As we're made in the image of God, we have a certain degree of Christ within us, right? And as we climb the ladder of divine ascent, as we struggle in increasing our faith and participating in liturgical life, we're increasing the Christ within us, right? So the saints are like they've emptied themselves so that Christ has filled them, right? So like the halo we see on the icons, that's Christ shining through them, right? But we all have, however small, there's a bit of Christ in all of us, no matter how big a sinner we are. And so maybe that self-hatred stems from a hatred of God. And what we're doing is we're hating the image of God in us because uh, Saint Seraphim, uh, Saint Seraphim Rose now, he was saying that there are no real atheists. Like atheists are like believe in God, they just hate him, right? Because otherwise they would just be, uh, you know, so we're just like they wouldn't care. Like, but people like Richard Dawkins and Hitchens and people like that spent their whole lives like basically hating God. Like their entire careers are based on hating God, right?
yeah,
You have to believe he exists to hate him. Like otherwise, you know, that doesn't make any sense.
yeah,
So maybe that's where that self hatred stems from. Is that like they don't understand, they don't have the discernment because they don't have the spiritual knowledge that they have Christ within them, and in that rebellion, there's a hatred of that.
yeah,
So I don't know. That's just a cool thought I had.
yeah,
Can ponder that
yeah,
tonight.
yeah, yeah. I wonder about it because I'm listening to Priest Monk Cosmos on Orthodox Talks. He's going through the life of Saint Nectarios, and what comes to mind when you're saying that is he was, I mean, the saint of our century. There's this book called Saint Nectarios, Saint of Our Century. It's actually right here if anybody wants to pick it up. But
Mm.
it's amazing how it's not, when you see how Christ was treated by the Pharisees, you know, it was because of envy. And those outside the church, I think really what comes to mind is, what things do I not want to give up? And also, do I understand the Christ that I'm hating? Do I really? I think it was Father Stephen Freeman. He said, if you were going to talk to somebody who's outside the church, and they're rebelling against, they're an atheist, they're somebody who doesn't believe. He said, what was it? Tell me about the God you don't believe in. I probably don't believe in him either. Meaning, their misconception about God. Like we as Orthodox, like
He's
if
not
you
God,
understood
yeah.
the Orthodox, if you understood Christ in the Orthodox Church, if none of your our passions take us away from Christ. Like I don't want to give up that thing. What do I not want to give up that's keeping me from Christ, from that experience of God in a deeper sense? Like the saints, you're saying, like, that they've emptied themselves so that Christ can fill them, right? It's like they've had to give up a lot of the things that, I mean, behind every passion is the demon. The demons hate Christ. It's something along those lines comes up when you say all that, because I think there's some merit to it. I don't think they understand. Christ on the cross, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do, I think is a big. I've been realizing a little bit more about that. Obviously, there are conscious people who are trying to take people away from the church, and we need to stand up and say, no, you're wrong. You are taking away the flock. We are not going to, no, this is the truth. Don't. But then there's this level of, like, if somebody's ignorant, if somebody doesn't know, like, that compassionate discernment, I think is really needed for a lot of these atheists, these people that hate themselves. It's like, I don't need to lambaste them some more. I need to understand them more, where they come from, what they actually believe, versus making assumptions. That personal connection, I think, is super important.
Yeah, I mean, you win them over with love rather than hate, right? If you just match their hatred, then you're not accomplishing anything, and it's not what Christ calls us to do, anyways. I do want to go back to another point, because we made a lot of good points, and I want to fit as much as we can in the hour. But your encouragement for your clients to pursue virtue, I think, is really interesting, because I hadn't really thought about it that way. But pursuing virtue as a means to um, relieve or even cure, so to speak, let's say mental health issues, and whether that's mental anxiety, social anxiety, or whatever. I want to talk about that because I think that's interesting. And when you talked about, like, what kind of community are you participating in? So, okay, a runner's community is, relatively speaking, more virtuous than a community of, beer drinkers. Right? You're self-denying, you're doing something positive for your body and your health. But it's not the ultimate virtuous thing, right? Because it still doesn't have Christ. And then, obviously the Orthodox Church community would be the ultimate virtue community. But tell us about your perspective on that, on pursuing virtue as a means to uh, self-help. I'm just kidding. Pursuing virtue as a means to basically embody, as a medicinal practice to, uh, combat against, whatever mental issues that your patients come to you with.
Yeah. So I'll say this before I say what I want to say is, well, I guess I want to say both. My parish priest, Father John Oliver, he said this to me once, and he continually said it to me, and I think this is really important for people to keep in mind, is Jesus isn't our life coach. His goal isn't to optimized and to not always even feel good, you know? And but what I also want to tack on to that is we have to carry our cross and follow Christ. He gives us the option because you, if you want to follow me, take up your cross, take up your cross and follow me. He gives us choice. We can either choose not to do that or do that. We can do that willingly or unwillingly. We know ultimately the unwilling people just suffer meaninglessly, and they just go about their lives suffering meaninglessly, not pursuing virtue, numbing themselves out until they die, and then the judgment comes, right? Sad, you know. Or we can take up our cross and follow Christ and do what he's laid out, he's revealed. We can follow this path. And although it may be painful, our souls are reordered instead of becoming more distorted. Our souls are reordered, and no longer is the flesh leading, but the Spirit's leading. And we're following Christ, and the flesh we're fasting. We're, vigil, discipline. I think that this goes back to the ascetic, the body ascetic, the ascetic life, I think is really, the ascetic life is what I'm trying to help everyone that I come into contact in my practice to get either a touch of or to go into more deeply. And obviously, I do not have the grace of the priesthood, so I cannot absolve sin. I can only bring people to psychological balance, and that is a good thing. I think that bringing people to psychological balance is a good thing, but it is not it's not the church. I can acquire the spirit of peace myself as a therapist and guide people and have an icon in my room, translate a lot of words that are good, true, and beautiful words from the church, but they need to partake in the church life and the sacramental life for that transfiguration process to have its full effect. But I do think that, for those who are ignorant and they don't come into contact with any Orthodox Christian, I'm not the one to judge. God's the one to judge, and their consciences will be the ones that they have to follow, So I think that the conscience is really important. I use that in my practice a lot because I'm like, okay, at least we can hear the voice of God through our conscience. Sometimes it's hard. It's more cloudy, let's just say because we don't have the commandments, which is the way we love God, which are the virtues, which, the saints, the lives. We have such a gift with the lives of the saints. Like, I don't think people realize how much of a gift. I mean, we can become saints too. By no means am I. Am I trying to struggle in accordance with the mind of the fathers and to follow the Holy Fathers? Yes, I'm trying to. And for these people, I try to tell them, I try to encourage them, who is somebody you respect? Who is somebody that we're going to follow someone who's a virtuous person? And I tell them, this is someone right over there, Saint Dymphna. I'm an Orthodox Christian. I have an answer to this question. But my question to you is, do you? And I try to challenge in a healthy way. It's like, who are you following? Who are you deriving your virtue or lack thereof from? Because we're going to look to somebody, whether that's our fathers, how our parents growing up, you see this a lot in disordered families, they have this subconscious burden that ultimately we're trying to work out, and it's good stuff that we try to work on that, and let's get that out, let's try to get to that normal, that balance, not the supernatural, not the carnal, bring from the carnal to the natural, the psychical is what some of the fathers said, St. Paul says.
Yeah.
And balanced psychical life is good, but we're going to die. we're gonna die, and that's a truth. That reorders a lot of things in life. Um, does that answer your question, or only part of it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's also a good place to kind of wrap up. So Adam, you started this community of young adults in Nashville. Tell us where, if anyone's in the Nashville area that's watching this, where can they go to participate and join this fellowship?
Yeah, so there's maybe I can give you the links too to maybe post in the post, but there's a GroupMe link, there's a Facebook link, and there's also an Instagram page. It's just Orthodox. I think it's Orthodox Young Adults, Middle Tennessee. There's men's groups, there's a women's group too, and then there's a co-ed group so that we can have all of our spaces. You know what I mean? It's important. Um, and then there's a YouTube channel, Orthodox. Um, it's Orthodox Christian or Orthodox Young Adults, Middle Tennessee, or Middle Tennessee Young Adult. I think it's Middle Tennessee Young Adults. Get
It'll
all
be in
these
the description below. So
exactly. Description below will help everybody out. Those are long acronyms,
link in
but
bio.
link in bio below. Exactly. Hey, you know it. And
Well, I
then, so
appreciate you, Adam. Yeah.
yeah, more than welcome. And then if people are interested in the Tennessee state lines, because I can only practice within Tennessee state lines as of now until I try to expand. My counseling practice is Adam Kohlan Counseling. Pretty simple. That can also be in the link below as well. If you're interested and need some therapy or know somebody that would need some counseling, happy to help. So
Awesome. Yeah. Go see Adam. I appreciate you again. This has been an awesome conversation. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Godspeed.
thank you, Matthew.